Hey, we have a phone number here. Kevin, is that you?
That's me.
Hooray! And everyone cheered. Awesome. Welcome to the call, Kevin.
Thank you.
All right, we will roll into the introduction. So, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. Welcome to this place. Welcome to this place here with us. Welcome to Bloom Network's themed call. I'm Hannah Mitchell, community sport, calling in from New Zealand, and I'm helping host this call today. So today we are here to discuss what is happening in the world of distributed manufacturing and how it can support healthy bioregional economies. A special welcome to our guests, Kevin Carson, Senior Fellow of Senior Centre of State Society. Kevin, I'm just going to pop you on mute for a moment and I'll unmute you when it's time to talk, okay? Cool. And author of many books. I'm sure some of you have read them, including the Desktop Regulatory State. We have Josephine Watson from doing organizational regional food system networks, and Lorenzo doing electricity and localized power grids. So it's going to be exciting, can't wait. But first, a little bit about Bloom Network. Bloom's mission is to connect and support regenerative culture makers around the world. And our vision is to have a future where resources are equitably distributed and accessible in creative harmony with nature. We think of ourselves as a media company which is rooted in and led by local chapters who are doing real world actions to make a difference in the world. We also think of ourselves as a verb because we are helping shift people from an extractive mindset into a regenerative one. So if you haven't joined our newsletter, you can grab that from the chat. And just to let you know that we have 2 other Bloom calls during the month. So we do 3 a month. This is a themed call where we do an exciting topic. We have a DAO call where we're designing a decentralized autonomous organization. And we have a fun social call to hang out with other regenerative peeps around the world, which is on the American Thursday night at 6 p.m. Pacific. There's the link in the chat. So before we dive into each of our monthly theme meetings, we open with a welcome to country and a short meditation to bring us all together. So I invite you now to ground yourself in where you're sitting. Get comfortable, take your hands away from the keyboard or your device. Close your eyes for a moment. And start to slow down your breathing and bring yourself into stillness. Bring a picture into your mind now of a natural setting that feels like home to you. It might be a river that you feel a strong affinity with, a tree whose trunk reminds you of your own strength, a beach that feels like your spiritual home, or maybe a mountain that deeply connects to your soul. Imagine now being in this place right now, drinking in the sounds and the feelings of being in this natural place. What smells are there? Is there moisture or salt in the air? Is there shade or sun on your face? Are there other creatures with you? What life is blossoming from the earth? What life is aloft in the sky? Feel into the space and your connection to it. You have a connection to the earth, and this is very special. Keep that. Hold on to that. Grow that. Ground yourself in that connection now, in the lands where you are standing now. And we turn to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which we are calling in from. They too have a strong connection to the land. We recognize these people, acknowledge country and their connections, broken and unbroken. We pay our respects to elders past and present across the lands of the earth and give our respect to the emerging leaders of the future. May our work together support them. May this deep connective wisdom be embodied, and may we move forward together. Tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. Welcome, welcome to this place. Welcome to this place here with us. I'm going to hand over to Magenta now, our Executive Creative Director of Bloom Network, who will frame our discussion together today.
Thanks so much, Hannah. And it's really, really lovely to see lots of new people and have a sense that you're all interested in and actively working on a lot of this stuff too. So we convened this topic of distributed manufacturing and bioregional production because we'd like to help make it happen. So Bloom is set up to share templates and business models that can be easily started to connect people with existing projects and to bootstrap customer bases for locally made goods. And also like help increase adoption of things like farm CSAs. And then lastly, we educate people about why localized production will be beneficial for them to participate in. And since our experts are coming from such different angles on this topic, to help set the frame for us today, Kevin, I'm wondering if you would share a bit of theory around localized production, like what it is and why it's important. Would you be up for that?
Kevin, you'll need to unmute yourself. I think you need to look at your phone. I can't unmute you by myself.
Well, relocalized production is important to the extent that it enables people and their communities to take back control of the material preconditions for life and for subsistence. And from a bioregional perspective, it has a very different material structure and is less material intensive than traditional mass production industry. Distributed manufacturing tends to follow a lean or just-in-time production model rather than the kind of push distribution that mass production does. So it has much less overhead going into things like distribution, marketing, long-distance shipping, especially less resources going into long-distance shipping because the production is so close to the point of consumption. And because it's so much lower in overhead and less capital intensive, it doesn't have the same material incentives towards waste production to utilize full capacity, to engage in planned obsolescence and so forth. To look at it from a broader perspective, ideally we'd like to see distributed and relocalized manufacturing in an economy where natural resource governance is commons-based, so we don't have the artificial abundance of material input that capitalist industry has right now. So there would be a lot more incentive toward things like circular economies, recycling materials cradle to cradle, and so forth. Overall, it's just a form of production that has a much smaller material footprint and gives people control over their own livelihoods. Takes back control from both capital and state.
Thank you so much. That was really helpful to ground us in the same plane of what we're looking at here. And thank you and everyone here for all your work on this for the years. I know a lot of people have been doing some epic research that are in this room right now. I'm going to go ahead and Hannah and I will read the guest bios and then we'll jump into the panel discussion. So first I'll introduce Josie Watson. She has a passion for bioregional governance and creating the environmentally integrated and socially nourished societies that humans need for the future. She is a Vermont law student and also pursuing her Master's of Environmental Management from Yale School of the Environment. She has worked for the United Nations FAO, Stockholm Environment Institute, and Tufts University to foster collaboration between communities, farmers, universities and think tanks, nonprofits, state governments, and international forums to foster development of regenerative food systems and economies. She is now looking at philanthropic funding strategies to demonstrate the spectrum of benefits that our species will realize by investing in regenerative systems. She is currently the head of research for the Regeneration Fund at ICV Group.
Cool, thank you, Magenta. I'm going to be introducing Lorenzo Christoph. Lorenzo is an independent consultant on electricity systems policy, structure, and market design. Areas of his expertise include wholesale power, market design and distributed system operations, system operator modules and distribution level markets, microgrids and energy resilient strategies, whole system grid architecture. Lorenzo's primary objective is to enable and accelerate the evolution of the electricity industry to a decentralized structure comprised of resilient community level subsystems using small scale energy technologies. And he has done most of his work in the California area. Welcome, Lorenzo.
And our final panelist today, Kevin Carson, who is speaking to set the frame here. Kevin is a writer who identifies as an anarchist without adjectives. He specializes in post-capitalist transition models, the new municipalist movements, commons-based local economies, horizontalism, prefigurative institutions, and post-scarcity technologies, which are all terms that I hope you learn about after this call. His current writing project is Exodus, a general idea of the revolution in the 21st century. It deals with the ways in which the mass-based, hierarchical, and insurrectionary transition models of the old left are being supplanted by horizontal, prefigurative, and evolutionary models. Kevin's other books are The Desktop Regulatory State, The Homebrew Industrial Revolution, a Low Overhead Manifesto, Organization Theory, a Libertarian Perspective, and Studies in Mutualist Political Economy. His work appears at Center for a Stateless Society, where he is now a senior fellow, and his writing can be found quite readily and freely on the web. And just to frame the timing here, we'll do about 20 minutes of panel discussion, followed by 20 minutes of Q&A. So I toss it back over to Hannah.
Thank you for that ball, Magenta. Okay, where did I write the first question? Lost it. Okay, I can remember what it was anyway. So the first question for each of you is like a 1 minute kind of question around how your particular perspective is going to help the bioregional at the bioregional level. So it's a chance to introduce what you do as well. And we'll start with Josie.
Sure. Yeah, could we come up with a way of inviting everyone to share their own thoughts via the chat, or would that just be pure chaos? Like, what do we think? Because yeah, just throughout, I've loved to hear everybody's thoughts, and there's so many of us.
There are a lot of us, and there's a lot of amazing minds here, so we can definitely use the chat. And you know, if it turns into some crazy thing, the great thing about, or we're recording this, by the way, so if you don't want your picture there, let us know. We can scribble it out somehow. We all can also download that chat as a bulk document, and that's where we usually in our blogs post all the different links that people have shared during the call. So if you want to drop stuff in there, then we can collate that and put it in the wiki and the blog afterwards.
So good to know. That's awesome. Love setting the stage that way.
Thank you,
Yeah,
Josie.
my name, of course. I'm Josie, and I've moved from essentially doing research into all of the basically emergent phenomenon networks of individual groups who are interested in regenerative economies, focusing on the food system. There was this funny intersection between, it's so funny. I'm so happy that you know, this call has brought in a theorists like Kevin and Lorenzo, because the question that sparked my research into how to foster bioregional, regenerative, agricultural economy emergence in the Northeast region, which is, of course, it's a relevant question because it has to do with the way family farmers would like to farm, which is tied to the way they'd like to feed their communities. And it's a feedback loop of the way communities would like to eat, how they would like to have relationships with their land, their communities in every state in the Northeast. I grew up in Connecticut, so I was familiar with that culture and the organic food movement and how it was completely lacking in state support. And there was an opportunity to leverage soil health policy and soil carbon payments to create an influx of public funding from the state to the food economies that the people wanted to see. And so for me, that is always the spark whenever talking about bioregional distributed manufacturing, is just giving communities agency over the food that they're eating, which is such an intimate part of our lives. And I think every aspect of the regenerative movement would like to see a little more citizen and community participation in shaping the policy and the law that governs the way they live every single day. So I'm working on the Northeast Healthy Soil Network. I've moved to work with a fund called ICV, which are, it's a brilliant, past Wall Street visionary who's trying to partner with all of his connections from his past life and move philanthropic funding into the regenerative space. And our question is, how do we fund the systems as they stand and not our isolated vision of the system? And I'm working on a law degree to ask, how do we better leverage public funding and work it through the system? So I'm extremely scattered right now at this point in my career, but those are pieces of the puzzle I'm focusing on. Let's move on to Lorenzo.
Thank you, Josie. That's great. Lorenzo, do you want to answer the same question? A 1 minute kind of response from your perspective of how distributed manufacturing aims to support healthy bioregional economies.
Well, I'm going to focus specifically on energy, and even more specifically than that, than on electricity. The reason being that energy is probably the single biggest source of the damage that humans do to the ecosystems that we rely on. And at the same time, we can't do anything without having and using energy. So rethinking how we do energy becomes, to me, a critical enabler of just about everything else we want to accomplish. And fortunately, there's a nexus now with the technologies that enable energy to be very local. It's completely scalable from the level of the household to the level of an urban city block to a larger neighborhood to an entire city and so on. I think of bioregional as having really a collection of many local communities and neighborhoods that participate in that bioregion, and there's some common biophysical relationship that they have to things like climate and water systems and all of those things that really benefit from a larger scale. But that larger scale still comes down to the activities of individuals. And what I see as really important as this transition is to have much greater face-to-face relationships. That is, get beyond the economics dogma that we've learned about the individual household being the unit of analysis, to a neighborhood being a unit of analysis where people actually see each other face to face and share chicken coops and community gardens and childcare and tools and so on. For those neighborhoods, we can create local electric power systems, except that the institutions don't allow them. So the focus of my effort is changing those institutions to allow not only local power systems at neighborhood and community levels, but also to use the larger network that they're connected to create an ability to realize some economies of scale, but without sacrificing the local focus on what's most important in each local community.
Beautiful, thanks, Lorenzo. And Kevin.
Well, I actually sort of answered this question in my introduction, because I was gearing it towards that 1 minute talk on distributed manufacturing and bioregionalism in the agenda I got by email. I got kind of mixed up on that, but
no, we sprung you on an extra question. Sorry, Kevin.
Okay, I see, distributed manufacturing and relocalized manufacturing as part of a complex of different relocalized economic institutions, along with community food production, the kind of relocalized energy that Lorenzo talked about. And they're all things that involve the local economy being more closely situated or reintegrated into the natural surroundings of the community. More reliance on the most local possible resource commons, agriculture being oriented towards local resources and watersheds and so forth. There's not the same, taking the natural world for granted that we have right now, when we essentially treat transportation and land as free goods and don't think about where things come from. It requires a much more conscious interaction with our natural surroundings. And as I said before, it's a form of production that's got a much smaller material footprint, is much less material intensive and less capital intensive. So I think I'm kind of repeating what I said before.
That's totally fine, because I think, for people who are new to this topic, it is also good to hear it a few times as to what it is about. So thank you, Kevin. Should I keep rolling with some questions, Magenta? Or do you want to ask one?
Oh, yeah, sure. I'm curious, that one we put in there specifically about anarchism. Let me pull it up real quick. Kevin, I'm curious your take on why anarchism is important to this topic. I mean, you probably, to some extent, kind of described that just there, but I'm just kind of looking to draw out from you some of your just incredibly rich research and scholarship that you do specific to anarchism.
Well, for me, it's actually sort of the other way around. What the importance of distributed manufacturing and relocalized economies is to anarchism. It's not so much the importance of anarchism as an ideology and how it affects economic relocalization. It's the ways in which these processes that we're going through of relocalization are shaping the form that post-capitalist and post-state transition are going to take. At least that's true, the kind of anarchist model that I subscribe to, which is interstitial model, which I guess could be best described by the old Wadley slogan of building the structure of the new society within the shell of the old. The local commons-based institutions that people are forming out of necessity right now to survive all of the crises of capitalism that we've seen so much more intensely in the first half of this year are basically the seeds of a successor society. And you know, as I said, people are turning to these expedients, you know, to things like community gardens, neighborhood workshops, local currencies, co-housing projects for sharing costs and risks, and pooling income, relocalizing energy production, and all of that. They're doing it out of the sheer necessity for survival rather than any particular ideological motivation. And I think it's important for anarchism as an ideology to be moving in the same direction that people are spontaneously moving in already out of material necessity, and do things to facilitate that.
Beautiful. Thank you so much.
That's one of the things that Lorenzo talks about, as well as like how we can transform our energy needs through defining the values and intentionally structuring them for the people that are around them. Have I summarized that right, Lorenzo? Do you want to talk a little bit about that, about shifting our, defining our values and shifting them intentionally to a bioregional focus?
Sure. So where I would start is, and this is kind of the obvious observation, is that one, energy generates revenue. And in fact, it generates so much revenue that it attracts monopoly structures that then control global geopolitics and local politics to a large extent as well. And as with anything that impoverishes people at various levels, it's all about extracting value from them and giving them back less than you're actually taking away. So thinking about energy and the ability to produce it locally now with the technologies that are available, and to tie it into, say, localized manufacturing and other aspects of community that Kevin talked about. Part of what needs to happen, in my opinion, in order for the benefits of transformed energy to really reach the people at the neighborhood and local community level that they need, is to change ownership models. That is, enable people to own the local energy resources in different ways, such that as it earns revenues, as it provides energy to the local businesses and the local households and whoever needs it, the revenues that are earned in that process get injected into meeting local needs in various forms, building local infrastructure. So I kind of think of, bioregional economy as really being like a body that's got thousands of cells, and each of the cells has to function as an entity. I tend to think of the whole system in terms of a layered structure. Like a cell in your body has its own integrity, and it has its own energy management systems, and it has its own exchange of information with its environment and ability to make decisions. In a sense, it takes actions in response to stimuli. But that cell is part of an organ in your body, like your heart or your lung or your brain. And those organs are part of your human body. And that body is a member of a family or a neighborhood. And so everything is built in those layers. And what potential is now with local electric systems is they can be as small as we want. And they can be then used to generate revenues through an economic model that's very local. But it means, rethinking really the unit of analysis to a neighborhood level, and tuning it in each location to meet what are the priorities of that neighborhood. In some places it's very urban, and they're looking for jobs, putting on solar panels on roofs, for example. In other places it's more rural, and they're looking at power for water pumping, for irrigation. Whatever those needs are, local drives some of the priorities, but the laws of physics apply so they can be integrated into a larger system.
That was the best answer ever. Josie, do you want to segue into there and talk about what you're doing with the different actors in your network, and how you're doing kind of what Lorenzo was talking about, but in a real practical way, actually on the ground, talking to people?
Yes, that's been a hot topic. It's just sort of as a millennial entering into a field that has organized itself through movements of various names, like we noticed right away that there's an organic agricultural sector that in a lot of ways has organized itself like a movement. You have grassroots networks like the Real Organic Project that are spread across the country. And you have the Organic Consumers Association and the USDA's network of organic producers. And then you have really the smaller network of family farmers that, didn't have the funding to get certified as organic. They see themselves as farming traditionally and stewarding the land. And there are also more radical communities like Soul Fire Farm and the Golagichi community who are really leveraging this idea of like really working with the commons that they're surrounded with to meet their basic needs, so they're not as under the power and extractive influence of the economy around them. I find that really interesting. Just one of the questions that comes into my mind after hearing Kevin speak is just, what are the forces that push us to stop seeing land as a commons that could meet our needs? I think that's a really interesting question that everyone who's attracted to healthy soils policy, that question is embedded somewhere in their psyche. And, they're trying to engineer a new relationship with the commons they're surrounded by into policy at the state level. And we noticed that there are all of these collectives around watersheds, like watershed alliances, soil water conservation districts, and collectives that are more formalized, like working with the Natural Resources Conservation Service of our federal level USDA. It's their conservation department, and they have their network of farmers who have been lucky enough to gain access to grants via the department. They're a network. And the Sustainable Agriculture Research and Environmental Protection Initiative also issues its own grants. And that's a separate community, even though it's coming through the same unit, which is the government. And then there are state departments of agriculture that work to facilitate that. And so we wanted to bring everybody into the same room. We wanted to incorporate the perspectives of formal soil health labs that were working to answer questions of what does it actually take in the first place to work with soil, which is this living, complex entity with millions of microbes that we didn't take the time to study during the Green Revolution. We were studying everything in a very broken down scientific method approach of, let's take this food apart, let's figure out what it's made of, and let's give the soil phosphorus, and let's give the soil nitrogen, because that's what food is made of. We didn't ask, how does the system live and breathe and function? And there are new groups entering the space that are asking those questions, right? So are you getting a sense from, you know, everything I've shared so far that there are multiple movements that didn't communicate with each other over time, and they all have a piece of the puzzle? And we wanted to create a space where people didn't even realize that there were divides between their separate entities. So we made it about soil. Like, everyone, let's come to the room and talk about something we all have in common, soil. And could I share my screen? Can I try?
Yeah, it might be locked. Hang on, let me just...
I've been working with...
Should be good.
Through research in ICV to just come up with ways of visualizing how everyone's connected. And this is through whimsical. It's easy to make a broken down, more technical map, like sort everybody into their various roles that they've been playing in their bioregional economies. Like, the farmers themselves have broken down and self-organized into members of the American Farmland Trust community. You have the National Organic, the Northeast Organic Farmers Association, which is our regional coalition of organic growers. And then, you know, people who wanted to think even more holistically, like about ecological soil health, formed the Vermont Soil Carbon Coalition and the Soil Sponge community. And everybody has the common goal of, they want to see the farmers that they're surrounded by themselves not go out of business. They want to see them thrive. And ideally, they want to see their food marketed at a price that they can afford. And, you know, our entire grocery store industry in the US is a separate entity from cooperatives that actually establish relationships with smaller farms. And basically everyone had what could be boiled down to a common desire to just develop a way of interacting with their farmers through cooperatives and buy all this food at a price that's manageable, because it would be distributed in a way to reduce the cost. You know, like, part of the high cost and price of food that comes from farms that we would think of as building soil, as working regeneratively, is that it's a lot more expensive for them to process and market their goods. We have a project that's developing in the Northeast called the Regenerative Food Network, which is basically a savory hub regenerative farm called Studio Hill in Vermont. Was airing his grievances and connected with an interested investor. And Jesse from Studio Hill was essentially saying, you know, even if we do grow enough food to feed the entire, our entire region, of South Western Vermont, it would be too expensive. We couldn't afford to process the chicken, to process the beef, and to get it to consumers at a reasonable price. And so this investor said, you know, I'm interested in seeing not just the Vermont food sector economy survive, because of this interesting fact that's on this is actually Regenerative Food Systems deck, but just look how much food is imported into the Northeast states, even though when you think about our commons, how much rich, beautiful land exists in the Northeast states. And yet, just because of the pressures that Lorenzo was touching on, exactly parallel to the energy industry, if a sector is profitable, actors will move in and try to maximize the revenue, and consolidation happens. And then all of a sudden, it's way too expensive to not be a huge monocrop farm, because the interests in question will move in, will take the land, and realize that they can persuade the government through the Farm Bill to subsidize that way of growing. And then before you know it, you're competing, if you're a Northeast farmer, against farms from the Midwest that are huge monoculture subsidized and run by businesses that have all this income. We're importing so much of our food. And so the Regenerative Food Network is a really exciting step towards, you know, not just answering the question of how would we all see policy change if we got together. And as you can see from this map, this is the number of, sorry, oh, so many tabs. That's life, so many tabs these days. The stakeholder groups that gathered for the Northeast Healthy Soil Network, which if you're interested in reading reports, like physical notes of what was said by everybody in the room about, you know, the question was, how can we build a food sector that regenerates soil and feeds everyone and meets everyone's needs? Because for us, soil health was tied to crop diversity and nutrition access. You know, the better we're farming for the soil, the more diverse the cropland has to be. And so if you'd like to, you know, read more into various opinions on how to do that in the Northeast, you can find it all on this website that I'll put in the chat. But yeah, you can see everyone self-organized into this room, like covering all of these areas, right? And we were organized via a Google group, and you can ask and answer a ton of questions via a Google group. But, you know, it takes intense structural change, you know, costing this sum of money to keep farmers in business by helping the infrastructure emerge around them. And so we know we have to move forward into essentially having more consistent conversation about how to influence the policy actors that have the public funds to make change at that scale happen. And that's the end of the, you know, how I see one pathway, and I think we have to take all the pathways, but one very visible pathway is leveraging the connections who have access and agency over public funding, connecting them to the knowledge of all these stakeholder groups that gathered for the Northeast Healthy Soil Network and are collected into a Google group. That's one pathway. The other pathway is more about emergence itself and how we can all work with the commons that already exist. But yeah, I'll stop for now. Sorry for going on forever.
Thank you, Josie. I think it's mind-boggling when you've mapped there just soil, what's going on with soil in the Northwest, and that's just soil, and that's just one little topic, and then we've got all these different topics and system shifts that we want to change, like energy and other things like that. So thank you for putting those maps up, because it really illustrates, you know, all the different actors that are going on. Kevin, just when you see all those things like that, oh, you probably didn't see it because you're on your phone. So we saw this intense map of lots of different actors happening in the Northwest farming network. And so we're wondering about what are the next steps. You know, is federated cooperative something that you've looked into? Can you share about that? And what kind of insights can you share around making it easier to kind of take this theory and make it real? Do you have anything to add to that?
Well, as far as federations of cooperatives go, I'm familiar with the Mondragon system and with Antigonish. Can't remember if that's in Nova Scotia. It's in one of the Maritimes, and they both have a federal structure with their own financial arm that provides capital for enterprise incubation. And I'm also really optimistic about a lot of the new municipalist movements, like the ones in Spain formed by post-M15 activists in Barcelona and Madrid and elsewhere, and they're springing up all over Europe. in Bologna, where they already had a really strong cooperative economy for the last couple of decades. A bunch of other European cities. In the United States, Cooperation Jackson, and the Evergreen Project in Cleveland, which was influenced to some extent by the Mondragon system, I think. I think the Democracy Collaborative that was behind setting up the Cleveland system consciously based it on Mondragon. And the Preston Municipalist Project in the UK is based on both Mondragon and Cleveland. So there are a lot of different projects that are trying to promote coalescence and consolidation between all of the different local solidarity economy projects and getting them to develop into and grow together into coherent, multifaceted local economies. And I think the impetus we're getting from what I guess amounts to a depression with the unemployment levels from the coronavirus shutdown and the waves of evictions and foreclosures we've got in process right now is sort of making survival the killer app for these different experiments. They're becoming things that people are going to have to turn to for their actual survival when they're laid off and have their hours cut back.
Cool, thank you. All right, we will be opening up to questions from the audience soon. So if you want to think about a question, you can either write it in the chat for us to read out, or you can raise your hand. I'm going to ask one more question to all three of you. And this is also an apology to everyone here for curating an all-white panel this time. Usually we have some people of color represented. But we'd love for each of you to answer about how your slice of the distributed manufacturing pie is making sure that people of color leading cooperatives and indigenous nations are helping lead the way in these transitional times. Do I have a volunteer to go first, Josie?
I'd be happy to. Yeah, I'll start by just noting how the entire organizational scheme was so heavily influenced by a book named Sacred Instructions. This idea, this really powerful quote that a source I won't name, he tends to say this really often in regenerative space organizing work, that human beings, if we do have the ability to connect on a level that's beyond intellectual to each other and to nature, we can receive instructions. We are able to observe, to learn, to connect, and receive instructions from the natural world, not only from the human mind. And we're given a cancerous cell as an example of what happens when a piece of an ecosystem loses touch with its instructions. It loses touch with its role, and it consumes to the extent of creating massive damage. And so the fact that regenerative space organizing and the question of, if we're coming together to talk about building a new community, like an agrarian community, what are principles that could guide this community in a way that would sustain it and keep it vital, create conditions for life to flourish for forever? We turn to a book written by an indigenous woman from the United States, Sacred Instructions. It's such a difficult time to reach out to indigenous communities and ask for aid in research when they're so financially strapped, that, you know, that's its own crisis that we have to focus on and dedicate time to. I'll send this link of an interesting project I observed at FAO, which is a recognition when FAO started to focus on agroecological support, that Indigenous groups throughout the world are bastions of the most important knowledge about how to steward ecosystems, harnessing their natural components and flows and the relationships within them, establishing relationships to them. So the FAO started a project that I observed called World Agricultural Watch, WOW, which basically set the goal of creating a database of collecting knowledge and setting members of Indigenous groups who are willing to engage up as the experts that they are, instead of moving from this top-down hierarchical system of knowledge that the United Nations is infamously, you know, perpetuating, this idea that members of Western academic institutions are the ones who should be followed to create global policy and law. They understood, no, we need to bring Indigenous leaders to the forefront and find a way of connecting them to those who want to receive their wisdom. And I mean, that's an aspect that I'm really interested in. And then for the issue of reparations and African American presence in the United States, I think should be of forefront importance, just considering how much land has been stolen from them over time and the extent to which there's no compensation for that. I mean, I think if there are communities cropping up that would like to reconnect with the land and grow their own food, and we see Solvar Farm and Leah Penniman leading the charge in the Northeast Farmers of Color Land Trust, that we try to create space, like we need to all create spaces where they can lead and use public funding, use taxpayer dollars, just start opening the channels of letting resources pour into enfranchising them with land, Indigenous communities with land. It's a calling of our time for sure.
Mm-hmm. Cool. Kevin, do you want to add your voice in there?
Oh yeah, I think, you know, the approach should be, you know, basically what Josie talked about, centering the efforts of people of color and Indigenous groups, and putting a spotlight on some of the amazing projects that are already, you know, being pursued. Kali Akuno with Cooperation Jackson is trying to build a commons-based local economy with micro-manufacturing, community land trusts, and so forth. The Rojava project in Kurdistan, creating a regional economy based more or less on libertarian municipalist principles. What people are doing in Chiapas under the EZLN governance, and there's a lot of stuff just, you know, going on all over the world. Just I guess getting out of the way and handing them the mic and trying to attract more support and resources to their work would be really important.
Mm-hmm. And Lorenzo.
Yeah, I guess what I would add from the perspective of work that I'm doing in California with a team of collaborators is policy at the state level that would essentially provide funding and expertise to communities all over the state to be able to do local energy planning. Because the idea is that the technologies are there, but there may not be the capability in terms of human resources and technical knowledge and expertise to actually be able to design a local energy system that meets the needs of a neighborhood, or that meets, say, resilience requirements for municipal services that need to function when the power from the grid goes out. And so as we think about a program that channels funding and provides technical expertise and other kinds of expertise to be able to plan local energy systems, what we're trying to design in is a level of granularity that's local enough so that you can actually target the most disadvantaged communities. And the electric utilities, the ones that exist and are not going to go away right away, get direction to be providers of technical information and expertise on the power system, so that we really kind of complete the ability to have local capability to be able to design energy that meets the needs of those areas with a local ownership structure such that the revenues generated go back into the community. And this can be done with tribal authorities as well as more conventional state, rather city and county governments, but it's got to move down to that lower level of granularity where we have, in a sense, a missing governance level. Most of our models about policy think about state and then city county governments and then individual households. And so there's an intermediate level that really needs to be developed, which is that neighborhood where people actually see each other face to face and can collaborate on all kinds of things.
Great, that's a well-rounded answer from all three of you. Okay, we can open ourselves up to questions now. So if you want to speak one, put up your hand, otherwise drop it into the chat. We're also aware that we have some other localized manufacturers and people from the 3D printing world here. So if you want to introduce yourselves, you're welcome to do that as well. So questions and introduce yourselves if you're actually doing localized production as well. Someone can be brave and ask a question.
I have a question. And maybe this could go to all three of the panelists or anyone who wants to respond to it. I'm interested in how we might stand up sort of regenerative bioregional models that would allow people, at least at, you know, sort of as an initial movement toward this, to find and access goods that are already being produced from a regenerative standpoint, recognizing that we're not all there yet and we're not all clear on what that means in some cases, but that would let people be consumers, at least in the beginning, of these kinds of products, so that they might actually find them in their lives and find that they could source them locally and express that desire. And so I point to something like fibershed.org as an example, where, you know, there's been an effort to at least identify everything from the farm to the fabric and the product itself that people could access who are interested in both supporting this kind of system, but then also, you know, expanding it so that it becomes more visible, making the unseen seen, so to speak. It's the only one that I'm aware of, at least, that's fully operational in the US. And I'm wondering about, you know, could we transport it to other regions, for example, and expand it beyond just fibers to include regenerative food systems and other, you know, kinds of life goods, so that you could actually be part of a life place if you wanted to be. And then, you know, creating what that looks like so that others could actually join. So just interested what your thoughts are.
Yeah, I'm happy to jump in just because Fibershed is such a beautiful example of a non-food aspect of regenerative economic emergence. I mean, just the idea of how many resources are sourced from land, and so fostering a community of regenerative relationship with land has so many potential outputs. And I think one element that we've been thinking about at ICV in terms of, you know, if you're still working in, you know, a US economic context, talking about how to fund just land acquisition is the most basic question, right? Because, you know, there are a lot of communities out there that are established in their businesses, whether they're farms or, you know, we have very few regenerative wool producers in states outside California, I think, from the looks of it. But yeah, I mean, I think that there's a lot of conversation around farmland transition towards more regenerative practices, and that's an issue of lack of clarity of what it means to be a regenerative community in all of the existing institutions we have to provide funding to help groups transition if they're interested. And that's a matter of education and communication. But then there are also so many individuals in this country right now who would be thrilled to help a community like that happen if they were connected with land. Or if they were connected with each other, you know, to the extent that they see themselves forming a community and, you know, not a formal organization, but a group of people, all of whom could fulfill different roles of making that kind of vision happen. I think that a lot of people have been witnessing that there's a calling that's been put out, who knows by what, probably Mother Earth, into a lot of people who are inspired to take on projects like this. And Magenta has been such an, you know, important educational figure in my life for understanding how many tools there are out there for creating online networks and platforms. Like we talk about Hilo and Turon a lot, which are as user-friendly as Facebook and have a goal of fostering community emergence and development among like-minded people who would like to see more projects like that happen. And they're based out of San Francisco. Magenta, maybe you could speak a little more on just the potential of connecting people and how that could create the power in any bioregion to help more projects like Fibershed emerge.
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of what we're getting to a little bit with the federated cooperatives thing too, is there's all of these movements out here, like everything that everyone's mentioned on the call so far, including Fibershed, and they're really hard to find unless you happen to be in one of the subculture niches that is working in that area or are physically connected with people. So the demand for this kind of stuff, I think, is many orders of magnitude larger than what the projects themselves are able to reach. And we've spent a lot of time through Bloom kind of analyzing why that is, which I'm not going to go into the details of that right now, but helping those groups have a, like translate their message to be accessible and use vocabulary that people who are not necessarily in that narrow political bandwidth that their group is communicating within or aesthetically can translate across things. And then also through, I mean, there are a lot of local groups doing things. Bloom is one of them, but like the purpose of local Bloom chapters is to bring people together in in-person events to build organic network structures over time so that people can find these things. There's more word of mouth, there's more diverse intersections of the different facets of this kind of transition, and then to utilize marketing and outreach. And kind of the purpose of our cooperative is to pool resources so that together we can do the messaging piece, because these small teams usually don't have enough money to hire someone to specifically do that. And the media infrastructures, so like Facebook and Google and mainstream advertising, do not incentivize and actively oppress the signals from these kinds of movements from getting out there because they're not necessarily financially and capitalist motivated. So there's a couple of system interventions that Bloom Network is helping do.
Great. Any other questions? We'll probably go for another 10 minutes before we close up. So if you've got any questions for our awesome panelists today, now is your chance.
Hey, I have a few questions. My name's Duke Jones, and I'm working right now on a startup or network of startups. It's still fairly early stage. This is such a strange liminal space to work within. So coming from the perspective of attracting funding and then looking at it through the lens of traditional capitalistic motivation of getting a return on investment, creates strange incentives that kind of spiral to a similar system that we have now. And yet, full empowerment of everyone locally is not a, it's hard for many to imagine or see that as a possibility. Or that would be desirable given what the thought is of the majority of people and the way, you know, what would happen if, you know, it's like the people who are naturally lazy, if you let them do what they want, they won't do anything. Whereas, right, we're actually seeing that people are creative, powerful, and wonderful. So looking at it of a tiny step and a tiny step that leads to something that's more universal. I mean, how are we seeing it? How are you all, I would say experts, as expert as you can be in this right now, approaching a step and another step to have sort of universal individual community level and then kind of bioregional level empowerment that's not encumbered by the frictions of like economics as it works now that requires exponential growth and cuts away everything else. How, like, what are the steps that you're seeing that's allowing that to begin to take root and actually be able to grow?
Okay, I guess I'll take this one, at least in the area of micro manufacturing. The technology is ideally suited for rapid diffusion into underserved communities and to bootstrapping by relatively poor communities, because by just about any metric of efficiency, it's incomparably more efficient than old style capitalist mass production industry. Capitalism was founded on primitive accumulation, enclosure, colonization, and robbery, so that it treats land and material inputs as free goods that they can just, you know, throw at the problem to increase their profit. And the counter economy, on the other hand, has grown up in a resource constrained context where it has to extract maximum value from every unit of material input. It's also based on an open source ethos that actively facilitates the rapid diffusion and use of knowledge, cooperation, collaboration, and so forth, and is much more agile, responds more rapidly to changes in the situation. Whatever innovations it comes up with are diffused much more rapidly because there's no intellectual property and other legal monopolies that function as barriers to exact tribute and impede people from cooperating with each other, developing social intellect, things of that sort. just the basic architecture of it is is much lower cost because of the open source manufacturing design. There aren't all kinds of expensive embedded rents raising the cost of the technology. It's modular, so the same basic designs can be replicated and used for a lot of different purposes. I think in most cases, open source micro manufacturing machinery costs as much as an order of magnitude less than the proprietary capitalist versions of the same machinery, just because of that open source hacker ethos. So you've got projects like Open Source Ecology with their factory farm, Factory E-Farm, it's called, demo project, where you've got 3D printers that open source that can be built for $500 worth of materials, routers, cutting tables, laser cutters, drill presses that can be built for less than $1,000. So you're talking about a garage factory that could be built for the equivalent of 6 months factory wages, that can produce stuff that used to require $1 million mass production factory. So I mean, it's ideal for community bootstrapping efforts. It's overall, it's an economic model that's like a swarm of piranha, and the old mass production economy is more like a T-Rex floundering around in a tar pit. It's just incomparable in terms of lowered cost, agility, and making the maximum use of both material resources and human intellect, instead of following a model based on wasting subsidized inputs and erecting barriers to cooperation.
Yeah, my favorite is the ability to optimize for use value rather than exchange value.
Yeah, exactly. And I encourage everyone, I don't have the URL handy, but just Google open source ecology and the village, what was it? Global Village Construction Set. It's their basic set of a few dozen different micro manufacturing tools and farm and construction machinery of various sorts that are all extremely cheap compared to their commercial counterparts. They're all open source, and the designs are all freely available. It's really an amazing project.
Incredible. Yeah, thank you.
We have another question from the audience, well, from the listeners on the call. Is someone raising their hand, or are you stretching, Catherine?
I'd be curious, there's a guy on the call named Navari who works in the 3D manufacturing space. I'd be curious to hear a few things that you're seeing people do with 3D printers in your community, like specific products that people are making that are local specific.
Okay, so I'm not super professionally involved with this, but I do have a 3D printer and know some other people who do. I've been kind of trying to get a maker space spooled up here in Charlottesville. We haven't had one for a few years now. Well, the reasons, that's another story. But one of the big things, and I think this is pretty common for a lot of communities right now, especially earlier in the year, as lockdown started and a lot of places were having problems getting a hold of enough PPE. Here locally, We had a few groups organizing. The university does have a makerspace, but it's not open access. And so the university and the high school, and then some of us who have our own 3D printers, we're all getting together and printing parts for personal protective equipment for the hospitals here. And I think somebody here might actually be from open source medical supplies, maybe. I saw in the chat, I don't remember there at the beginning. So they'll know more than I do, but that was one of the big things that we did recently, is sort of a collective effort here in Charlottesville, was a lot of us getting together and working on masks, working on face shields and all that kind of fun stuff.
Is that person on the call that wants to introduce themselves that was in the chat? I know Todd's been doing 3D printing, but he's left the call. Oh, okay, someone said it. I believe that was Nathan, but he has had to drop off. Okay, I will ask our final question. This is for all three of you to just close our time here together. So I'm going to ask you the question, what is your vision for the next 15 years? Where are we going to be in 15 years and how are we going to get there? Lorenzo, we haven't heard your voice for a while.
Well, I guess I will just make it short. I think we all need to start where we live. How do we get out of our houses and know our neighbors better and start to do cooperative activities where we share resources? You know, ideas are out there like local currency and shared community gardens and so on, but I think it actually takes taking the action to get to know the people that live immediately around us and start to establish face-to-face relationships upon which then to develop collaborative projects that make our neighborhood better and stronger. And you know, it's on that basis, I believe, that that we will start to create the alternative to what's happening. I tend to view metaphor that I really liked. I heard from someone many years ago that view the systems that are failing to provide our needs as essentially going through their end of life and self-destructing. But let's view them as compost, which can become fertilizer to grow the new things that are going to grow out of that. And so I think of neighborhoods as seeds for creating the thing that we want to succeed the extractive dysfunctional systems we have now.
It's really encouraging to hear you talk about neighborhoods as strongly as you are, Lorenzo, because when I was doing my child-friendly cities work, I was very focused on neighborhoods as well, and it's definitely reinvigorated that enthusiasm for the neighborhood, except with your lens and with the lenses of the others here, is to take that right out and how we can be more resilient and regenerative within our neighborhoods. So thank you for that encouragement. Kevin, where do you see us in 15 years' time, or where would you like us to see us in 15 years' time, and how are we going to get there?
Well, all I can do is talk in terms of trends because, I mean, it's, you know, it's an emergent process with a lot of turbulence and chaos, and just this year we've seen an incredible number of black swan events that no one could have foreseen that are just having an incredible impact. What's that phrase from Lenin? There are decades when nothing happens, and then periods of a few weeks where you go through decades worth of change. So there's no way of anticipating what other unforeseen crisis events are going to happen over the next 15 years. But if you look at the past 15 years, the things we've seen, the whole arc of movements, starting with the Arab Spring, M15, Syntagma, Occupy, the Black Lives Matter movement, and the anti-pipeline movement, the rise of really large left-wing movements in the American Democratic Party and the British Labour Party, you know, plus all of the municipalist movements we talked about, everywhere from Barcelona to Cleveland and Jackson, that have developed over the past 15 years. I expect those trends to continue. And we've also seen two major recessions or depressions that were, both of them, the worst at that time that the United States has been through since World War II. I expect we'll see more of the same over the next 15 years. So we're going to see, you know, continuing chronic unemployment and underemployment that makes it a matter of necessity to turn to all these economic alternatives that we've all talked about today. I come from an anarchist background that sees the development of the successor society as something that takes place over a period of decades within the interstices of this society, and I expect that process to very much continue over the next 15 years, and I'm hopeful that, as Lorenzo said, those seeds will continue to grow and interact and develop, coalesce into something bigger.
Beautiful. And Josie.
Well, I would love to invite everybody else who has a little more experience and a little greater number of years on planet Earth. I have this interesting article, though, that's definitely a seed of my vision for the future, about Midwestern farmers taking charge of what they're growing on their land. This interesting article from Schumacher Center for New Economy about reparations through establishing not only a commons, but a commons for African Americans. Here's the Midwest. And a really interesting talk, if you've never considered what it will look like for land to be passed from the generation of farmers who currently owns it to the next generation. Severin and the Agrarian Trust gave a really interesting talk of pioneers on it, and it's a fascinating vision for the future that moves into a more regenerative philosophy of stewarding land and about land ownership, and to what extent can our commons be stewarded collectively as a commons to meet the needs of all. I think these are really interesting visions for the future, and they all have to do with everything Lorenzo and Kevin touched on. Anybody else?
Yeah, I've got something to sort of add. Can you all hear me?
Yes, we can.
Right. So I guess over the next sort of wee while, what I see as an answer is society shifting from a materialistic success to a more experiential success of life. So when you talk to people, instead of saying what is your job title and what sort of car do you own, or do you own things, it'll be more, what sort of life experience have you had? Have you been in love? Have you been, you know, devastated? Have you owned a dog and had the experience of that? Have you had a best friend, you know? And we're seeing that in the economy around, say, music. People don't buy music, they just buy the right to enjoy the experience of music, and things like that. And so I see that as the fundamental catalyst to shift the whole economy to a locally grown, because the locally grown is a connected community. So at the moment, the capitalist world lives in a transactional economy. So it's like, I turn up to a restaurant and I say, I want you to be nice to me and I pay you to be nice to me. That's a transactional, it's a one-way kind of thing. They depend on me to pay them money. So that's like a prostitute. So that's not an economy that is sort of wholesome long-term for society. So I sort of describe it as interconnected. So it's kind of like I go to a restaurant and someone feeds me, but then they depend on me for something else and I depend on them. So that's an interdependent economy and society. So I see those things as the sort of main shifters as we move on, and the younger generation are asking for those things more and more. That's what I'm observing. And it's also a good story. Like there's some logic behind it, because at the moment there's a lot of discussion around little answers that solve little bits. There's no sort of what connects all of those bits together and support all this transitional. So from a technology point of view, generating local energy, electricity, how to share it with your neighbour, all of those things can all be solved. They're all easy. How to feed ourselves with food that's nutritious, that's easy. We've done that. We know how to scientifically do that, but we're not doing it because we're stuck in this old mass production world. So we've just got to move on. So I don't know, is that I just sort of put my 2 cents in. I'm new to this group, so.
It's great to have you here, Boyd. Does anyone else have anything burning to say? Oh, Josie, you unmuted yourself. I see you there.
Oh, that was an accident. Processing Boyd's call for not working to fix our current system, but build an entirely new one. You're among friends here.
Yeah.
I would like to share that I really am digging into collective intelligence and how it can make it global. So I really love being here and connecting with the Bloom network, because there's so many interesting projects and thoughts. I leave the Zoom call like filled up with hope and perspective for the future. And I really love what Lorenzo said about taking this system as a compost. And I often think like how we burn down dinosaurs and put them out into space, and how this could be a great opportunity for us to take all this life that it's above us and put in the ground, and maybe in the 15 years from now we have a world way vibrant and full of life. So I tend to think that maybe that's where we're heading, a place even more filled up with lives around us in all these forms. So thank you.
Thank you, Flavia. Okay, well, we've definitely gone over our hour-and-a-half mark. So I want to thank a huge thank you to our amazing panelists, Lorenzo, Josie, and Kevin. Thank you for being here. Our follow-up from this call is we will write a blog, and we'll also make available the video and transcript, if we do that part, over the next week. And so you'll see that come through Bloom's social channels, or it'll be on our website for you to have a look. We also have access to Hilo, so if you're interested in jumping onto that platform, it's a little bit quiet at the moment. We need more voices in there sharing stuff. So if you're interested in doing that, let us know. Our website is, Arlene, www.bloomnetwork.org. And on there you'll see an opportunity to register for the other community calls that we have, 3 every month. So thank you all for being here. Just before we close fully, just close your eyes for a moment. Think about all the amazing things that you have just heard here today. And now take these affirmations and hold them inside yourself. Affirm your connection that you have to the earth and the connection to this knowledge as it comes and binds itself inside your body. Take that enthusiasm out into the world and share the good things of what we're doing here at Bloom Network and how we can be involved together. If you're interested in becoming a Bloom member, that's also an opportunity to financially support the work that we're doing here. You can find that information on our website. Any last words, Magenta, or are you good to go?
Oh, just thank you so much, everyone, for the transmission of knowledge and the patience of digesting all of that together. Really, I learned about many new things on this call, which is not super common for me with the Bloom topics. I don't know. So I'm just really excited for more of that to start happening and more of people working on this stuff, connecting with each other. So yeah, any comments, insights, like after the call that surface to your mind that you want to share with us, including how we can make these calls better, feel free to shoot us an email at community@bloomnetwork.org. We're really doing this in a mutually beneficial way with all of you and what you care about. So really invite that communication. Thank you so much.
Awesome. Sending love to all around the world. Look forward to chatting to you all again. Thanks once more to our panelists, and we'll follow up with you over the next week.
Looking forward to staying connected and hearing from you all as future panelists.
Ciao.
Great to meet you face to face, Josie. And I definitely will be talking to you more about soil, because I've just won some funding to do some soil work here in my town.
Hannah, that's so cool. I hope that we all end up on the same network, that we all end up in Hilo or Tehran, can just all talk to each other all the time. Yeah, good stuff.
Cool. Nice to see some new faces here. If you haven't joined our newsletter list, please do that so you can stay in touch. I'll just post it in the chat again. Cool. All right. Well, thank you, beautiful faces. We will say goodbye now.
Bye.
Well, thanks a lot. It was fun.
Thank you, Kevin. Really honor to have you here. Thank you so much.
Appreciate you having me.
Cool. Let's stay in touch. All right. Bye, everyone.
Bye.